Hey guys, Jon Le Tocq here from iwanttodothat.tv. As you know, at the moment I'm training to look at doing a Muay Thai fight out in Thailand at the end of the year. So I've travelled over to America to start learning to fight initially. And I've also caught up with Beasley here from Innovative Results here in Costa Mesa, and he's going to talk us through who he trains at the moment in the way of fighters and also what methods he uses to the training and nutrition. So Corey, thanks for your time, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice to see you again.
Thanks for coming out.
Who is it you're actually training at the moment, and what kind of fighters are you working with?
Most of the guy in Orange County here in Costa Mesa, there's probably 15, 20 MMA gyms that are within a 5-mile radius.
Right.
It's kind of the mecca for a lot of this stuff, so we're kind of fortunate that way.
Yep.
But yeah, we have probably about 45, 50 pro fighters that come through. Right now, I mean, there's guys from Strikeforce and UFC and Bellator and all kinds of local shows and stuff like that that come through. But yeah, a lot of talent.
Nice. Can you give us any names, guys that you're working with, and then the guys can check them out?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest ones that got fights coming up right now is Ian McCall. He's the #1 125 pounder in the world right now. They just started the 125 pound tournament in the UFC to crown the first champ. Shane Del Rosario, he was undefeated in Strikeforce and just signed his UFC contract to kind of switch everybody over.
Yep.
He's got a big fight coming up with Gabriel Gonzaga in May. And there's a handful of other guys that are here and there and coming around.
Nice. Cool. Okay, so can you talk us through your approach to training fighters? Obviously, they're a very different breed of athletes, got a lot of things to be getting on with in terms of training, skills. What's your approach to bringing a guy in and getting him on the strength and conditioning path?
Most of the stuff, like our system here, is all based on mindset, movement, and recovery. So, I mean, the mindset part, obviously, if they ain't got their mindset right, they're going to be up and down and inconsistent, and hot and cold, and all that kind of stuff, So, getting their goals set, knowing what they're doing, why they're doing it, all that type of stuff, just like you would with any other client, is hugely important, especially for those guys to know, what they're doing, why they're doing it, because a lot of those guys they want to go hard and they want to go home.
Yeah.
So things like foam roller and self-myofascial release, stuff like that, they could overlook. But as you would know, like a lot of those guys, that's probably one of the most important things we can do for them, is just to open them up and get them to move more efficiently.
Yeah.
So that's a part of it,
Yep.
As you get to the movement part, I think it's the same as with any other athlete. It's going to start out and you're going to assess that person and see where they're at. What can they do physically? Do their ankles, are they mobile? Are their hips mobile? Is their upper back mobile? Stuff like that. Because of all the different transitions and needs that they have, a lot of times they get exposed really, really hard faster because they're doing so much work. So a lot of the stuff that we do when they come in is just getting them moving again, getting them mobile, getting them flexible, getting them, that stuff so that they're stable. And then moving on into stability and strength and power type stuff as we determine it's right. Otherwise, they have no foundation. They want to do all the fun, crazy stuff that everybody sees on YouTube, and then they just end up getting hurt.
So can you talk us through a typical session? Let's assume it's someone no major injuries or any dysfunctional problems like that. What would a session look like from the moment they walk in the door?
Most of the time when they show up, they go over on the mats with the foam rollers, the trigger point tools, stuff like that, just to get their stuff opened up, get them moving. Then we usually go through some mini band work to kind of get their hips firing up, their hips and glutes. We'll do a series of crawls, we'll do a lunge series, we'll do a locomotion series, runs and side shuffles and stuff like that. Just as a basic warm-up from head to toe. Probably takes like 10 to 15 minutes. And then we'll roll into some reactive type training, where we'll do some plyometric progression, with them, depending on where they're at. And then maybe some core rotational work, different stuff. Same thing, progressing, just depending on what their ability level is. And then we typically move into more strength type work. So we'll get into the core lifts, whatever their core lift is for that day. I basically right now we're kind of breaking it up, more a hip dominant day, a pull dominant day, a quad dominant day, and a push dominant day. That being said, there's a lot of variables as far as planes of motion. Because I use a ton of frontal plane, transverse plane, because that's sport. A lot of people do everything is just sagittal, straight ahead. When the power, especially from a fighter or whatever it is, as they're moving or they're striking, all comes from rotational strength. So we do that a ton. And then towards the end of the session, we usually finish up with some type of more the conditioning side of it.
Yeah.
You know, pushing them depending on what energy levels and stuff, or energy systems we want to hit that day. Use a bunch of different tools that we have here and kind of run through it.
So you're looking at covering all the elements within one session. You wouldn't have a conditioning session and a strength session. Do you ever split them up, or is it always?
Yeah, I mean, typically I'll see the guys maybe 2 to 3 times a week.
Yeah.
So I don't have a ton of time with them. So I want to hit them, you know, as much as I can. We'll still periodize on what we're doing and how much volume and all those variables.
Yeah.
And we'll still vary that stuff. But I'll help plan them when they're here. I'm hitting them sometimes. And then I'll also give them homework if they do homework. Most guys don't do homework when you tell them to do it, you know, so we got to do as much as we can while they're here.
So you mentioned periodization there. Obviously, traditionally people have worked through different phases: an endurance phase, a strength phase, a hypertrophy phase. Is that something you still do, or do you tend to?
Yeah, absolutely, because I mean, it depends on if he doesn't have a fight date set, you know, then I'm wanting to work on his weaknesses,
Yeah.
you know, and if he has a weakness in strength, then I want to work on his strength, you know, while we have time.
Yeah.
Because once it kind of gets into that, you know, that 8 weeks in to a fight date, you kind of don't have too much of a window to really develop any big changes.
Yeah.
So when they have that time off, I'll either work on their aerobic base so they have a little bit better wind, their gas tank's bigger, or it's their strength or their power or their injuries or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Then once it's fight time, then yeah, we're trying to work. Like you said, there's so many variables, there's so many things we got to work on. It depends on who they are, who they're fighting, what's their game plan, you know, what are their strengths and weaknesses and timeout. We vary all that stuff as it goes into the fight so that they're ready.
Okay, so let's say we're 4 weeks out from the fight. How do things change in terms of volume and the nature of the sessions? Is there any changes, or do you go straight up to the fight?
Yeah, typically, like if you think of more traditional style lifts, that's more the way I think about it. Traditional stuff is more 4 to 8 weeks out.
Yep.
And as you get closer to fight time, you know, if you're fighting Muay Thai, you know, I want to kind of start 4 weeks to the fight. I have to start changing the drills and things like that we're doing, so that it's more fight specific. Because you can do deadlifts all day long. It's way different than picking somebody up. I mean, there's no change about that. You can have a real good, solid, powerful, you know, base of strength from a deadlift. But if somebody's on all fours and you try to grab them and lift them, that's a completely different feel. So you're going to start training those fight-specific moves, typically like 4 weeks-ish in. You know?
Okay, and we spoke a few weeks ago, and you mentioned about you had some guys coming up that had a fight in 2 weeks. How did the strength training change then? Do you reduce the volume? Do you eradicate it completely?
Well, typically the week before the fight, they're off. So they come in and maybe do trigger point. You know, the self-myofascial release stuff to just get them as healthy as possible, get them moving as much as you can, right? So that they're fresh and ready for the fight. Typically, our hardest week, depending on who it is and their age and their tolerance, you know, usually 2 weeks out from the fight is probably their biggest intensity. You know, I might reduce the volume a little bit. So maybe if it's a 5-minute round, or you know, we've been training up to 6 or 7 minutes, then I might dial it back to, you know, 4 and a half, 5 minutes or something like that. But it really just depends on looking at your athlete and seeing where they at, what else are they doing outside of my gym. You know, how's their diet, how's their sleep, how's their stress, you know, how's their training. Do they train at one location and you have control over a lot of stuff that they're doing? Or are they training at 4 locations and they're just getting smoked? Well, then my approach changes. You know?
Okay, we'll get on to nutrition in a second. Obviously, with your guys, any kind of fighting, weight's critical. How do you get guys super strong, super powerful without adding too much muscle, without adding too much weight? Let's say they're at the weight they need to be at.
Yeah, it's typically it's just more, you want the relative strength. You know, so it's like, you know, a heavy, like as you're talking about the strength part of it, you're talking about a very low repetition, high intensity, and not too much volume. It's going to build a lot of muscle, but you want that 125-pound kid as strong as you can possibly get at 125, versus doing like more of a bodybuilder routine and having him bulk up to 45 and then not being able to make weight, and he's not even strong, you know, as he could be. So that's typically with the strength stuff, it's just keeping the volume down, the strength, the intensity high.
Yeah, cool.
And then playing with it, rest intervals depending on where they're at.